right, we're back for another episode of Beyond Barriers. Beyond Barriers is a conversation with leaders and community evangelists about the challenges of navigating an effective accessibility strategy. In these episodes, guests get to share their successes and setbacks with a primary focus on how they've overcome specific obstacles that otherwise might have ended the journey. My name is Brian Gavin. I'm the co-founder of Wally. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Mike Bowen. Mike, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. I'm happy to join.
Super excited to get to unpack our conversation today. I'll just start out by saying you got me a little bit excited based upon the shared hobbies we were sharing offline. But today is all about accessibility, and I always like to start by getting to know you a little bit, getting to allow the audience to understand your journey into accessibility and how you've become a leader. So maybe you could we start and dive in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Um, yeah, I kind of I have a two-part introduction into accessibility, which is pretty interesting. This we're talking about digital accessibility at the moment, but my original foray into the subject was back when I went to school. I got a degree in recreation, which it's a laughable name, but it's a pretty fun degree. It's kind of public health, wilderness education, um, natural resource management sort of degree, which is really nice. And one of my courses was in the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I got to learn about kind of accessibility in the physical space, how we make buildings more accessible, natural places more accessible, and things like that. But that law was made kind of before the internet was really a big thing. So I got to learn that. I got some exposure, and in my first career as like a wilderness guide, I got to see just how we help people kind of join us in our physical spaces and do things like skiing or climbing, even if maybe um, you they needed help with like vision or movement or hearing or something like that. So that was really cool. Kind of into my career in wilderness guiding, I switched it up a little bit and I got into the digital space and taught myself web development. And kind of around the time I got my first like full-time job at a web development agency, I just so happened to be um, taking some classes, finance and things like that. I had a mentor through my school, and my mentor happened to be a man who had he had a genetic condition, which he lost his sight kind of halfway through his life. So he had a successful career. He had just retired from the financial industry. And partway through his career, he had lost his vision and was still making it work. He was a huge inspiration, fun guy to work with and talk to and learn from. And while I was like being mentored by him at my agency, our leadership was looking to make like an ADA sort of offering and their products. So they were looking for somebody to raise their hand, and just because I knew this guy, I was talking to him, my ears perked up, and I jumped in on that. So I was able to kind of spearhead like our introduction of like accessibility into our websites and things like that and that organization. I had to learn from the ground up, how to audit a website, how to remediate things, what accessibility was, how you integrate it into systems. I got to learn how to educate technical people. I mean, it's the whole thing. I was drinking from a fire hose, but that was like a really cool experience for me. It was really neat to just kind of learn about um, how that worked and really just see kind of where the digital space lacked and try and fill that void at least where I could. So that was my introduction, and I think ever since I've been able to kind of use that skill and lean on that skill, and I found it to be incredibly valuable in the front end development space, at least in the user experience space, and I feel like I use it every day. So yeah.
Like several guests who have joined me in the conversation before, hearing that you were inspired by someone who lived with a disability, and a challenge that they had to overcome. It's it's oftentimes that catalyst. It's just interesting. I don't know, or maybe it's a growing theme with some of the guests, but um, teaching yourself accessibility. I don't want to date you too much, but how many years ago are we going back in your career of when you spearheaded it for the first time?
I would say it was about 5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, back then it was an interesting space. It's not really back then. I mean, this still applies. It's an interesting space because, like, I took a course in like Americans with Disabilities Act. So if you ran a physical store that somebody had to go to, you need to make your building accessible to a variety of people. If you don't, like, you can get in trouble, and rightfully so. Like, we need to accept people into these spaces. And there are some, like, obviously, if you have really old buildings and things like that, we're not like putting people out of business or like ruining lives for this. But like, if you can accommodate somebody, you should. But like the web space at that time, and still sort of depending where you live, what organization you are, like ADA doesn't really like cover the web space. So even then, when I started, we were navigating this strange area where like people were starting to get sued. Um, ADA was sort of being applied to the space, but it was very hazy. Like, how do we measure this? How do we hold people accountable? Like, how does this fit in? So it was pretty interesting. Just trying to learn that. I feel like it's still a little bit that way though.
100%. I mean,
Yeah,
I was gonna interject a minute if I could to the how you measure and how you hold people accountable. I mean, I'm curious what type of best practices you've adopted in those two areas, and yeah.
yeah. So when I was first learning, I think I was referencing a lot of like the lawsuits that were happening. So when somebody would take, like, I believe it was like one of the references was like Domino's Pizza or something to court, um, because they couldn't like access the application to like participate, and transactions and get their food. Um, they were treating the website as a storefront, right? And just people need to be able to go to the storefront and get food. So referencing that, I saw that the court used the web content accessibility guidelines as like a reference. So we kind of just also use that too. Like, we saw courts were referencing that document, so we would just be like, okay, well, we're going to use that document too. When we build a website, we're going to make sure that we align with those recommendations. So that's kind of how we would like benchmark, um, kind of if something was accessible, if it was acceptable, as a digital product. And I think even now I work for, I consult, and I consult for a state organization in California. So in California, there are actually laws that point to WCAG. So that's a really good reference. That's kind of what I use to kind of benchmark: are we accessible? Is this an acceptable,
Mm.
website or feature or whatever?
And how about the holding people accountable?
Holding like the business accountable and developers.
Yeah, and team members. I mean, part of what kind of stuck out to me early on was the education that you had to kind of pioneer for your organization. And I mean, so much of what I hear, it's a challenge because it's sort of like, oh well, that doesn't apply to my job, and it's kick the can down the road type of thing. But so the accountability framework, I mean, sure, it's like, oh well, management has to drive it from the top down, but I'm curious if you found any effective ways to hold people accountable or to drive the interest.
Yes, yeah. I think, maybe the most powerful tool is empathy. I think, um, if you hand any person a list of to-dos, and try and whip them into like following those to-dos, nothing's gonna happen. I mean, like we just, as people, don't really respond well in those environments. So I think like the first place is empathy. When you educate, to find, when you educate your developers or your peers or something, to find a way to help people relate. Just like you've said, and like I shared, I'm passionate about this and I enjoy it because I know somebody who's affected by this. And I think the common denominator with this whole thing is like we're all an accident away from needing help from you know these services, that whether it's the Americans with Disabilities Act, as passionate developers who make websites accessible. Imagine losing your vision if you had to go to your bank account on the internet. Um, Not even a person. That would be challenging as well. But just imagine you lose your vision and you have to, yeah, access services. That can happen temporarily too. You get a surgery and you're out for a week. You break an arm. How are you going to use your mouse to navigate a website? Um, there are so many ways this can happen temporarily or permanently, and we're all on the scale. And I think helping people understand that, helping developers understand that, and like gain a passion for it is the first step. But beyond that, holding people accountable, I think baking, kind of like what you do, baking tools into the process is super helpful.
Mm.
So you guys build linters, you have the wax framework that kind of helps people kind of inspect their code as they're like compiling it and working on it, and then you have like tools that help people test it. So kind of offloading like a lot of the work from the developer and the development process is super helpful too. So yeah, just helping developers build empathy and like kind of automating some of the thought processes as you go, I think are keys to holding people accountable.
I love it. And I'll
Yeah.
go back to the first point that you made, that your undergrad in recreation and the fact that you got exposure to accessibility is pretty awesome, because very few undergrad disciplines have I heard, even as recent as folks who graduated in the last couple of years, get any level of exposure on accessibility in any role discipline. So kudos to your alma mater for putting that into the coursework. And so now, several years into your career, you've implemented and scaled probably more than one accessibility strategy as a consultant. You get a variety of different um, frameworks and maturity states of maturity. What type of challenges have you run across?
I think kind of like the biggest overarching challenge in this space would be like, say you get your developers to a point where they are paying attention to like the technical aspect of what we need to do to make a website accessible. So we know all the syntax and the code to make something usable by a keyboard, which can be mapped to all sorts of devices used by users with all sorts of physical needs, right? So like, yeah, a developer can understand how to make a website usable by only keyboard. We can understand, how to implement solutions for like people with hearing impairments, neurodivergence. I think the hardest thing is working with people who are visually impaired. And once you have just the technical aspect down, it's fine. And there are a lot of automated tools that can like point out what you need to do. There's like a syntax for everything. Like it's pretty understandable and easy to learn, but you can get to that point and you could have like an automated tool look at your website and give you an A plus on your accessibility. But if you don't go through it yourself, if you don't try and experience it as a user, as a human being, um, you're like, you could get that A plus and your website could be just horrible to use as a screen reader user or as somebody who only has access to like a keyboard or toggles or something like that to navigate. So I think a big thing is a lot of people like to check those boxes and they check their automated tools and they're like, yes, cool, we've got this. But there's like a human component. You need like experienced people to jump in and feel it out and just like make sure like, hey, this makes sense, or this is really chatty, or um, yeah, I think it takes more involvement than just like the digital space and the automation, which it seems like you guys do as well, because I think you offer like some of those services, expertise, you're doing community education. I think it a lot of people just like to stop at that automation, but we need to take it a little farther as developers.
Yeah, I mean, the contextual understanding that you can glean from voiceover, there's nothing more challenging than hearing like, "Oh, well, we're YCAT compliant," and it's I hope and I think with the advancement of each new iteration of YCAG that there are changes for the better, but you can essentially turn off all the fire alarms that come back from an automated scan. But meanwhile, your experience is still really poor for those that rely on assistive technologies. Um, yeah, here at Wally, we're working on cracking that code every day. But having users, just like you would in any other kind of persona of person you might, is having folks that can test using the assistive technologies is crucial. How do you scale something like that? I mean, I think some of the clients that we work with, they're in an enterprise space. It's a really large, vast application, and like you're gonna hire. How do you scale it? I guess to be short.
Yeah, absolutely. I do work right now with, so I work with a consulting firm. We work with a lot of government websites. And so there's like a huge need for this because, as I've said before, government websites need to comply with WCAG recommendations. It's just an expectation. It's got to happen. So we have some systems in place, and every project that I work with does it a little bit differently. Some better than others as well. But I think, if you're going to try and scale this at an enterprise level, the key is, I mean, you need knowledgeable developers. You need at least somebody on the development team who's interested in this and like paying attention. And this person will hopefully be ensuring that the other team members have linting. They have some sort of automated tool to help them double check their work. All the time, I'll be typing, an ARIA attribute into an element, and I'll like type the wrong thing. It's I'm thinking in my head, you know, ARIA collapsed versus ARIA, like I don't even know. I'm probably thinking of the right thing. I'm trying to think of a wrong example, but it's just like it's easy to mix up all the different attributes, and you can think you're right, and just have something watching your back and enforcing, like, hey, this isn't a real attribute. You need to like be applying the real thing. So I think to scale it, you need to offload as much of that thought process as possible off the developer via automation. Once you're done with that, you need to have team members who are willing, like I said, to inspect it physically. So in our organization, we actually have ADA experts who are just lifesavers. They're like QA for accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're done, I mean, the developer is checking this, but we pass it by somebody who is just doing this day in and day out. They have exposure to it, interest, they're reading about it, they're in it all the time. And we can pass them our finished product and they'll give us feedback. It's a second set of eyes, somebody who cares about the product. So that's something that currently I have in my organization that I love. It's just like an expert, a QA person who likes this, who inspects it, gives me their opinion, and we get to bounce back and forth about, is this a good experience? Is this chatting too much? Is it overwhelming to somebody on a screen reader or whatever? Are the keyboard navigation techniques like too complex, not complex enough? And I think I think it's a balance of those two. I mean, you need automation and people
Yep.
to kind of keep this going, keep it scaling. But one person can look at a lot of things, so you don't need to hire like a whole team necessarily. But just having a handful of individuals who are passionate is goes a long way.
The human touch in any development of digital content is always. Um, I've had a lot, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but the biggest disruptions being AI, and it's like, well, how much can we really replace some of what the human understands? It's getting better and better, but um, where would you say you find the most success nowadays as you scale?
I think something, I have like pet projects that I do kind of outside of work, and as I start working with like more modern frameworks than what you might see at an enterprise level in government work. Like I love Next.js, for example. Um, it's just a great framework to work in, and I see as time goes on that these products they start baking in some of these like automated tools, which is nice. Um, and I think that's where my success is. I'm always impressed when I see what's coming out next, and
Yeah.
um, just when I find a tool that's like brings in all the like dispersed tools that are available to like test accessibility and like put it in one place. When I follow like a hello world tutorial and I'm like halfway there, that's where I find a lot of success in like testing and working with accessibility. So like for example, I've seen like in the enterprise space, when I'm testing, I will go to like Axe tools to like physically test on a website. I might have like Site Improve running in the background and sending us like, emails periodically saying, oh, you have a failure here or there. I'm using Google Page Insights. I have my linters. I have all these things. And it's really hard to put all these tools together and set it up and like know what you're doing.
Hmm.
And I've just seen as time goes on, like all these different services, like including yourselves, are just getting better at like grouping these in and just like kind of giving a single point of entry and access to like all these tools, which is nice, because it's really challenging to kind of figure it all out from scratch. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and you hit I don't, pet peeve may not be the right word, but organizations that are dealing in a legacy code base. I mean, there's nothing better to be able to step into a framework that's built with this accessibility in mind, but the legacy code base is almost like, well, do we even can we kick the can down the road? And that becomes challenging because more and more tech debt, and then it's like, well, we're actually not going to rebuild the entire application. We're just going to reskin the front end or the back end or whatever it might be, and it's like tumble, 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 tumble. So where would you the disruptions that are coming into the industry, and you've shared a lot of interesting insights so far, but how do you see the disruptions changing accessibility for the good or the bad?
yeah, I'm like kind of excited about this, and I don't really have I don't know if I'm good at describing it yet, but if you look at if you look at the impact like the recent development and like large language models have had on search, right? So just in the past handful of years, you go to Google or Bing or whatever, and you search your item, and instead of just getting a list of links, we can get all sorts of unique elements showing up on the page now, whether it's like a carousel with recipes, FAQ accordion, just like really interesting like components and interfaces that um, contextually make sense with our search, right? So it's this like kind of fluid user interface that is happening, and I don't. It's not necessarily AI that is like making that happen, but it's just like what what kind of recent developments have done to spark the imagination of people is amazing, right? So, I mean, yes, I don't want to take credit away from those tools or whatever, but like what is amazing is like I think people are allowing themselves like a new like paradigm or a new way to look at like how we interface with computers. It's not just like a command line, but instead it's this like evolving, changing, morphing thing that we can interact with. So what I'm hoping that we see, especially for somebody who's a screen reader user, like you go to your bank website and your goal is to log in and make a transfer of funds from one account to the other. You actually have to like skip to every button to the login button. You have to log in, you have to find the inputs, you have to log in, you have to kind of inspect the page using your ears and like go to every element until you get to the one you want, and then you're there, and then you get to transfer your funds from one account to another. It's like a process, it's a journey, and it's I could imagine it would just be such a difficult thing to do. And I'm hoping that we start seeing interfaces where you go to a website, you go to a search bar, and you're like transfer funds, and the steps are laid out in front of you. So instead of like tabbing through everything on the website, it's just you can type in, I'd like to transfer funds, and you're given a login form. And once you go to a login form, it knows what you're doing, the website does, and you are taken directly to a component that allows you to transfer funds. So I'm hoping that, people get more creative, and that um, we just have interfaces that kind of like morph to people's needs based off of, what they've typed into a search bar, or whatever we come up with. I'm really excited to see what happens in that space, and it totally applies to what we do now. So yeah.
100%. So does that put, in this case, I mean, I guess it's a multifaceted approach because the data engineers and folks that can kind of aggregate data that's needed to visualize it, but it puts a huge emphasis on UI and UX folks kind of advancing the thought process, product folks thinking differently about how do we, you know, generally when you go to your bank account, like what are one of the top three things you do, right? Like, is there ways to simplify the path of going through product experiences so that you change the method of reaching those states? I think is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there would be limits, right? If you had a really complex product, I don't think you could just go from A to B
Yep.
via like a chat interface or whatever. But I mean, I think in certain examples, in certain products, especially like essential things that really people are using every day, I do think we can kind of like catalog components, map them to search terms, and just, it's like when you're auto completing an address, right? Or a search. I mean, we have ways and methods of kind of guessing what people are looking for, and providing that to them. So what's the difference in between providing the last 50% of an address that somebody's typing and typing the last 50% of a feature? Like, you only have so many features on a website. People start sharing an idea of a feature they're looking to implement, and you can give them a list of options. I mean, we're seeing this implemented in search already. So I think, I mean, that's like a complex thing to go through and talk about. I would have to pull out a whiteboard, and we'd talk
Hey,
for
I'm all
hours
for it.
to
We
map
can.
that out. But I do think that I do hope that we go in that direction, and I think that would be super useful for people who just like who need help, navigating just actually the general population, but especially people who just use screen readers and things like that. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, what I've always been impressed about is generally the emphasis of doing good for those that rely on assistive technology results in a better experience for everyone. Which in your example, like back to the Google search results, like yeah, I find it immensely more helpful now to consume that information than I did 5 years ago or 2 years ago. So um,
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
listen, Mike, I know that you have allocated about 30 minutes to the conversation. I always like to kind of close out with just anything from a topic perspective or an area that you're super passionate about that you want to touch on.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, that final point that you brought up, I think, is the big one. When we're looking at accessibility, when you're a fashion person on a team trying to sell this to a client or somebody else, you know, the return on investment, the payoffs in investing in accessibility don't just affect the what we assume is a minority of people, which is not. I mean, most of us are probably going to fall into this group at one point or another. But like when you make these changes to help, this seemingly minority group interact with your product, you're not only helping them, but you're kind of making the product, you tend to make the product just more usable by people in general, more usable by other software programs. It's just accessible overall to everybody. So the investment, while you're focusing on these small groups, by targeting the extremes, you tend to include the whole, which is something that's really powerful and really important to remember when you do this work.
I love it. I couldn't have summed it up better. I want to say thank you so much for coming on today's episode. An enjoyable, insightful conversation, and I really enjoyed it and appreciate it.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Mike.